That's what we do, man's on the grind, that's what we do. Ain't gonna stop, evolving our game on a daily basis. Stay on the top of the game, experiment into the win. We ain't gonna lose, the grind don't stop. I don't need your boost, I'll see you at the top.
Cool. All right, we're absolutely stoked to have incredible human on the podcast today. Former Northlander moving down to Canterbury, started his unbelievable rugby career. 36 tests for the All Blacks, Canterbury and Crusaders legend, renowned for his physicality, courage and sense of humour. Now living in Spain, where he runs the Aotearoa Heart Project, and definitely someone who inspired me as a teenager. So big welcome to Norm Maxwell. Welcome to the Evolve Your Game podcast, mate. How are you?
Yeah, great. Thanks. Nice to be here, brother.
Good.
Awesome. Yeah, welcome, Norm. Lovely to meet you, I guess, even from a remote location. So it's pretty cool to have you on, mate. I'm a massive rugby tragic, so it's awesome to have someone of your calibre on the pod. Firstly, just a little bit on your childhood, growing up in the far north. Do you want to talk us through that, where you were born, and what it was like growing up?
Straight into it, eh? I was born in the far north, Rawani. That's where my father and my grandfather was also born there, in the hospital, the local hospital there. But I moved down to Whangarei when I was 3 years old. Started playing rugby league, actually, at the age of 8. So no one in my family were sort of sporting orientated, but my brother always jokes, he reckons that because I got two older brothers, and they're all like mechanically minded, they always had always fiddling with their bikes and all that, and I always had a ball, so he reckons that we were born with a wrench in our hand, you were born with a ball in your hand, so I was always drawn to physicality, and so I started playing rugby league. I just one of my friends' fathers he went and asked my parents, can I go play this game that nobody sort of knew about in my household. So once I started playing, I loved it, so played rugby league for 5 years, and then switched to rugby when I was 14. So it was sort of a good mix. I reckon that league is a great way to start, because it gives you the basics, So I sort of started off with rugby. I remember I was laughing about it the other day, because one of my mates, his daughter, she's struggling to find a rugby team, so she started playing rugby league, and she's like 14. So I was saying, it's a really good opportunity for you to hone in your core skills, your tackling, your running with the ball, your ball retention, sort of being able to get into a defensive line, and so those sort of skills that I had sort of transferred over to rugby, and then I sort of grew tall at the same time, so that sort of came into the whole line-out thing, And I remember the first game of rugby that I was playing, I was smashing guys, because I'm used to guys coming at full pace, And so in rugby, there's there's space there. So I was suplexing guys, and the ref was like, "Hey, man, it's all different."
I was going to say, is that where you got your tackle, you run it straight and you're smashing people from?
Yeah, I think it's a pretty good thing to, it's especially when you're younger, you're not really doing a lot of the stuff with the rucks and all that, So I think it's definitely a good base, I actually like the game better than rugby, just because, in some ways, because it was your destiny's in your own hands when you play league, It's if you really, especially if you play in the forwards, because if you want to tackle, if you want to run with the ball, you can. In rugby, it's you can run around the whole game and end up doing nothing, even though you want to do everything. But so then I ended up playing rugby there, and I don't know, I was always reasonably good, I was very competitive, especially when I was I wasn't that good at school. I didn't really have any other options, the rugby was the only sort of thing that I was really good at, so I always put everything into it. So I was very highly competitive, so even to the smallest degree, so I was always in the game, just especially against my opposition. I hated feeling like I'm losing anything, you know. So they're always the small battles where just like if I missed a tackle or I felt like I got dominated in some situation, I'd just be burning to try and like um, to try to what's it sort of turn that around, you know. Yeah. And so then so I ended up just playing like I said, Northland's a smaller union. So I played in pretty dominating teams when I was I always sort of laugh about it when with my coaching sort of in Spain, but I was always playing for good teams, you know. For some reason, I always played in teams that were always dominating. Apart from apart from when I played for Northland and we played against Auckland, Waikato, and all that. So all the Island boys and all that, they were at a different level to us, you know. But I think I don't know. What else you want me to carry on?
Did you, oh, you go.
Yeah, sorry. Yeah, just so high school is what high school were you attending? Is that when? So obviously you said you played league up until I presume you said 14, so around that high school age. So was it that high school transition where you made that change?
Yeah, sort of. The one of the things was one of the issues was there was only 5 league teams, you know. And so we just kept rotating and just playing each other all the time. So it was getting and then rugby, it was I don't even know how many teams, maybe 15, you know, maybe 20. So it was like a easy decision sort of go into rugby. But so that was probably, what was I would have been 4th form probably when I started playing rugby. But then, so I started playing there and then, like I said, I was making all the rep teams, and one of the things that I like to do was tackling. You know, that was one of my favorite things to do. And I one of the things I used to get a buzz out of it. You know, I remember I scooped this guy one time, right in front of the grandstand. It was I was under 15s, but I just remember the rip. Everybody was like, "Wow!" I mean, in those situations, you just man, you just get it, you know, and so you sort of you end up sort of chasing that feeling. I suppose it's like a feeling of acknowledgement, I suppose, you know. I suppose when I was younger, off the field, I was, I don't know, battling in a few different ways. And then on the field was sort of like a different life for me, you know. It was like a split. So a lot of times, you know, especially if you're not that good at school and different things, I didn't really see much of a future, you know. But on the rugby field, it's sort of where I felt it was a support structure for me where it felt wanted me to stand up, you know. It was one of the only places there. A lot of other places in life, they want you to sit down, you know. They want you to sit down and be quiet or do this or do that, or, you know. And in rugby, that was one of the only places where I felt permission to stand tall. And I think rugby is awesome for that in terms of teaches you how to stand up, you know. It's like you're getting knocked over all the time and you're constantly standing up because you can only play on your feet, you know. And so I think that rugby was a great support mechanism for me, especially through my teens, you know, in that period. But you have to remember that we're talking years ago now. And so this was early 90s or mid 90s. So there was no such thing as professional rugby then. So I was sort of just cruising along and I liked playing rugby, but I didn't have any other aspirations, you know. So I didn't have any, didn't really know what I wanted to do. So I left school and went on the dole for a while, and then that was sort of I did pretty well at school in terms of my rugby. I ended up playing for New Zealand schools in '94. Yep. And so I think that sort of put me on the map in some ways. That was a little bit of a fluke. I sort of ended up, not really a fluke, I suppose. I played one game and I scored this try from 45 meters out. and there was a selector there and he was and then I ended up, in that try, I put the ball down and the guy tackled me from behind and I landed on my shoulder and I popped my AC joint out.
Oh,
and,
no.
Yeah, that was annoying. And so I ended up playing 40 minutes the whole tournament. You know, it was a secondary schools tournament. But from there, the guy picked me to play for the New Zealand schools from that 40 minutes, you know.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. And then I left. left school, went on the dole, and then I like, oh, what was I going to do? I didn't really know what I was going to do. And then I walked down to my local club. There's like Horohoro, which is my local rugby club. It's like about a kilometre and a half from my house. So I just sort of walked down there. And at the time, I was like 18, and I didn't really know if I was going to play for the senior grade or whatever, because in Northland they don't really have any like strong grades under 19s and all that, you know. It's sort of like if you leave school, you end up like having to play for like the Bs or something like that, you know, like senior grades B. There's not really a strong under 19 competition. So I went down there, and then I ended up like playing for the top grade, the senior grade, which they had a lot of good players back then. That team was a pretty good team. They had guys like Glenn Taylor. Norm Berryman comes from that club. Warren Johnson was playing there. So back in those days, this was 1995. So back in those days, you had all the All Blacks used to play club rugby, you know. You'd have So that's sort of one of the things where, you know, we can talk about that later. But in terms of like with the professionalism, you know, with the connection between the supporters and the professional rugby, you know, it was different back then because the people within the club, they know the players personally, you know, so they've been there, you know, because, you know, within a club. Because and I remember going to their club, and that was the first time I ever felt a real community, you know, because I played at school. Because with the rugby clubs, you got everybody, you know, you got everybody there. You got the old people, you got the young people, you got everybody from every different profession. It's quite an amazing sort of melting pot, you know. And that was the first time I actually felt like, you know, a sense of community, I think. And then, so I ended up playing for the top team, which was sort of surprising. I was under 19s that year. And I played pretty well, but one of the issues was I was always skinny, you know, I was always light. So it was like, man, it was tough for me in the physical sort of against these like men, you know, just because I was sort of an immature under 19 as well. Like back then, I'd never been to the gym in my life. There was no such thing as academies or anything like that. You know, you just sort of playing. I only learnt from playing, so it was like you play on Tuesday. I played touch. At school, I played like held at school, and that was it. You know, that's all we did. That's how we learned how to play rugby. There was no like I said this before, professionalism, and so sort of potluck with sort of the coach you got. But up north, we were just playing. You know, so that's how we learned. So you either play like correctly or you don't. So these sort of techniques that they get taught, now, where everybody sort of gets taught the same thing. We didn't really have that, you know. This is sort of where you got the diversity in the skill range, you know. And obviously the physical side of it. And so I'd never been to the gym before in my life, so I was behind the 8 ball when it comes to the physicality, you know. But in some sense, I had to learn to be a bit more intelligent in some ways, you know. And so like the time and space. So I was actually quite an intelligent player in the lineouts and things like that. So I had to think on my feet, and or else I'd get like, I don't know, smashed, I suppose, or injured. Or injured was probably more the other thing, you know, because I obviously wanted to try and dominate the contact, but when if you're like really skinny, it's a difficult thing to do, but you can do it. But you have to do it through timing, you know. So a lot of times I'd rush out of the line to try and like get the guy and the ball at the same time, you know, and things like that. Where if I let him have a big like speed on me, he's gonna dominate me, you know. And so I think that's where I sort of learned to be a little bit more intelligent. And so I sort of through that period I didn't really want to play lock either, you know. I hated playing lock, but they always put me there. And so and so I like the open game. I like scoring tries and being more athletic. So back then it was like I was breaking the sort of mold of what the normal, and that was part of why I was sort of standing out. Like because back then it was just like the locks used to just sort of tackle. I mean, just used to like catch the ball and just go in the mauls and just go in the rucks, and they wouldn't do anything extra, you know. Yeah. And so I think that's sort of the thing that got me a little bit like more eyes on me. Like this guy's like he's getting out there, he's sort of scoring tries like unusual situations, and making tackles and making impacts, different impacts, where that wasn't really the thing to do back then, you know. They had different, well, they were like different mindset. And so then I ended up playing all the way through. And then at the end of that year, club season year, they had a Northland game, an invitation game versus the Vikings. And the Vikings, it was like a pre-season NPC game. And one of the guys they pulled out of the team, like I think it was Mark Cooksley or someone like that, who was supposed to be playing. And they ended up putting me in there. So I ended up playing against Northland. And so, and then I did all right. And then they picked me for the Northland team. So I ended up being in the Northland team like straight away, you know.
Yeah.
And so I ended up going
19.
Yeah, 19, yeah. And so then and once again, it's sort of just positional wise, you know, like in the type 5 at 19, it was tough, especially when I hadn't been to the gym. So that was another level of competition up, you know. And so that was all quite quickly. And so it was just a quick rise. And so I went all the way through there for the NPC, and I played like, I think my second or third game I played for the NPC. I played quite well in that game, and then I was always marked from there. They were like, "Oh man, this guy's," you know. And there was a lot of expectation on me from there. And then we went that year. That was in '95. We went through all the way to the final.
Oh wow!
And I played one game. We played Taranaki in the final of the second division. And then so halfway through that '95, that's when they created professional rugby. You see. That was at the eve of the World Cup, and so everybody was surprised. It came out of the blue, and so all of a sudden it was like, oh shit, oh man, this is, you know. But at the time, everybody in the NPC got to sign contracts. You know, they signed a base contract of 65,000, and so at the time I was like, oh yeah, we were laughing about it, like, yeah, this is not going to happen. And then at the end of that year, I played that one game against Taranaki. Well, we had 2 televised games, the semi-final and the final, and then I got picked to play for the Crusaders at the end of that year. So they put me in the draft because back then the Chiefs, Northland were in the Chiefs region, and so they had like a lot of good locks. You know, they had like Ian Jones, Mike Cooksley, a couple of other guys that were in there. I think Blair Larson. Because I think it was North Harbour, Northland, Waikato, Bay of Plenty. They were all in the Chiefs, you know.
Yeah.
So, and then Crusaders didn't have a lot of people to draw from back then because they just had the Canterbury team, and then they had obviously the Nelson and Marlborough and all that, you know, and South Canterbury and North Canterbury. So that's where they picked a lot of players in the draft, you know, that we had a lot of players, even from all the rejects from all around the place, you know. And so we went down there and so that was it. So from within a year from leaving school, not knowing what I was doing, I was for $5, I was earning $5 a week for vacuuming my room to $80,000 a year, you know, within 1 year. So so that was that.
That's pretty cool.
That's an amazing story.
You're quite good mates with Norm Berryman. Did he come around the same time with you to the Crusaders?
Yeah, so Normie B, he was so he lived up the road from me actually, so he was from the same club as me, but he had gone to King Country at that time, and I think that he was involved with the Chiefs at that time. I think he got. I don't know if he got drafted in that first year of professional rugby. Maybe he didn't. Interesting thing about Norm is Normie was it was a little bit like he was I don't know how to describe it. He's a unique character, you know. So you didn't really know what you were going to get with him sometimes. And so sometimes, like even when he played for Northland, he was a bit of a loose cannon. So I've heard stories about him sort of being out till 5 a.m. Partying and then turning up and then like playing half a game and scoring 4 tries or something, and then and like things like that. So some of that was they were a little bit dubious with him in some ways, and so I think that I'm pretty sure that he might have been in that Chiefs that first year.
Yeah.
But he came down his first year down with the Crusaders was 1998. So that was 2 years after that.
Oh, okay, cool. So you're the trailblazer. So you said about the weight and being a skinny fella.
Yeah.
So you're sort of around the under 100 kg sort of mark. What did you end up sort of getting to the sort of peak of your career? Like, how'd you get on?
Yeah, that's right. Well, sort of rewinding that. So when I first went down to the Crusaders, they had a fitness test, because they didn't know who I was and all that. And when I weighed in there, I was 90.4 kgs.
Yeah.
And so it's like, and they did like a fitness test down there, and they were like, "Oh man, who's this guy?" And they had like one back then. It was like a percentage of your body weight, and they had to do like out of 20 times, and I think it was one thing, and I was doing it with all the halfbacks, because they're all like my size, like Dustin Martin and all them. And so then they had to do leg press, and it was 2.5 times your body weight leg press, and the best out of 20, and so it's like, and everybody else was like cracking out 20, no problem, And when I went to do it, it's like I couldn't even budget off the rack, I was like, no. And then they go, "Oh, we've got to get something. We'll do 1.5." I couldn't budget. I couldn't take it off the rack either. And then they're like, "Oh man, we've got." And then the trainer was like, his name's Motzi, Mouth of the South. He's the super loud guy, And so it was the first time I ever seen him quiet. He was just like, "What have we got here?" And then then they go, "Oh, we've got to get something. We'll do one time your body weight." And then I ended up getting like the weight off the I pushed it up. And then it pinned me down the bottom of the machine. So they were like, "Oh my god!" But that was sort of my first introduction into sort of professional rugby. But part of the issue there was as well is that I didn't have the physical base. I didn't have any preparation, so I went straight in. They went straight in from training. But like I said, there was no academies or anything back then, so I went straight into like full-time training. So before that, I was only training Tuesdays and Thursdays for 2 hours and playing with the boys. And all of a sudden, I'm doing weights and doing all these other things, man, and my body was ruined because I had no base. I couldn't cope with it, and so I ended up having to like try to. I ended up getting injured, like my leg, there was all sorts of things happening. I was tearing muscles because my muscles are so stiff. I couldn't I couldn't run properly from doing the weights. And and that's what it took away from my athleticism. I ripped one leg and I muscle out of my leg in the second year that I was playing, and I never ran like freely after that. So I could only run like 75%.
Yeah.
But so I was always sort of battling because that speed was one of my point of differences. But then once that speed got taken away from me, I was weaker, I was slower. And I was smaller than everybody else, so that's when I had to rely on my sort of intelligence and being and my attitude, But sort of the height, to answer your question, it was, I probably ended up getting to like 107 maybe. It's probably my highest, but I mainly was floating around 103.
Yeah.
But again, I never really had a chance to put on that weight, because I was playing. So once I started playing, I didn't stop. I was starting every game, And so rugby went from like 6 months out of the year to like 11 months out of the year. And so now a lot of the things coming back now, in terms of like these lawsuits and all that from what happened at that time,
Oh,
but
really?
for me, you look at Carl Heyman and all these guys with the head knocks and all that because they weren't monitoring us, And so we were doing massive contact at training and doing all sorts of different things. Obviously we weren't as strong and as fast and as fit as the players now, so the impacts are at a different level now. But at the same time, we weren't prepared for it, Other people were more prepared, but I was probably ultimately the most unprepared out of everybody. In all regards, just because of the transition from school to so quickly, and the rugby, how it happened so quickly. So that was sort of like he was scrambling for the start, but everybody was. So it was like not just the trainers, the coaches, everybody was scrambling, in terms of what do we do here? Because it's easy to look back in hindsight now and say, well, professional rugby sort of kicked off, but back then it was uncertain. because it was like they were even talking about like combining two. Their first year when we were playing, they go, so if you guys don't perform, us and the Highlanders, we might combine you. We might combine you together, for the next year, because it wasn't set the structure, So we were like, oh no, half of us are going to lose our jobs,
Yeah.
Yeah.
Wow.
Tabai said there was one wee patch where you put on 5 kg almost overnight. Can you tell us about that?
I don't know what period he's talking about. But,
when you put some weights in your pocket, maybe.
Oh, okay. Yeah. So that was one of the things where I was like, because they used to weigh us when I made the All Blacks and all that, was like I was like hovering around 100 kgs. I was like 99 kgs, and it was like I was always worried that they were going to drop me. I was always worried they're going to drop me because of my weight, And so ended up like they used to weigh us like every day, so I'd like get like some weights and put them down my pants, and sort of be heavier. But the problem is with that is that once you do it once, you have to continue, So it's sort of like, or else you're like dropping weight. But it was like paranoia for me.
Your lifting percentage has to go up too.
Nah. They only did that one year, I think, but they had all sorts of different ways of sort of torture us, man, with the old fitness test.
Awesome. So when you made that transition to Canterbury, well, actually, we talked to a few guys. So we talked to Tabai, we talked to Matt Sexton, we talked to Ben Blair, Greg Feek. Who else did we talk to? Razor. And they, just to paint a picture of what you are like as a player, as a person rather than just a player. And they had some pretty big raps on you. They all said, this is pretty much a common thread from all of them, said one of the greatest team men they ever played with, a huge heart, one of the toughest guys on the field, always brought positivity, great mana and great energy into the group. And then Alistair, you tell us about what Tabai had said specifically.
Yeah, Tabai sent in some stuff on behalf of him. He says you never belittled others, never complained, you were always positive, funny as, hard back then his banter was ruthless as well. So
that's nice.
Yeah.
It feels like a lifetime ago for me now, man. It's a long time ago.
Matt Sexton said, pound for pound, the biggest hitter in the game. Deep thinker, caring soul, one of the great characters of the game.
That's good.
Pretty big reps. So they've played some good players.
Yeah, no, that's really nice. All those guys. I love that. Well, for me it was. I think we had a pretty special sort of group of players, especially with the Crusaders. So I think that in that first year that we played, there was a lot of the Canterbury guys there. We had some of the older school guys. Richard Lowe was the captain in '96. But we ended up coming last that year. We come 12th. We only won 2 games, and then in '97 Wayne Smith came down. And so I think that was a big transition for us. Wayne Smith is a very, as we all know, sort of recently as well. He's an amazing coach, an amazing person. And so. For me, I think that he really laid the foundation for like the Crusaders and just sort of the way that we would sort of interact with each other. And one of the big things with sort of Smitty, I think he hated because he was obviously a great player sort of in the 80s, and maybe late 70s or around the 80s. And so, but he didn't like, because before then, sort of before professionalism, there was like there was a lot of hierarchy within the rugby, and so there was a lot of, I suppose you could call it sort of bullying, I suppose, especially for the younger players that sort of came in. There was an attitude that you had to prove yourself, that you weren't part of the group until you know the story. And so I think Smitty hated that, and so he wanted to try and have everybody on that same page, so I think a lot of us sort of, and we were lucky because you had guys like Matt Sexton, which were and Tabs and all those guys that you spoke about. They, this just what they said about me, I could say about them. You know, they had the same sort of. There were a reflection, and those guys were the older guys then, you know, as well. And so they're sort of, and Todd Blackadder and Stu Lowe, you know, they all sort of welcomed you in, and they did it. It wasn't because we were sort of underdogs back then. We were the guys that were sort of like just sort of rejects that were all sort of thrown together, not the Canterbury guys, but everybody else, you know, that didn't make their own thing. We sort of just had this, and there was an absence of like those egos, you know. And sort of worked hard, and I think Smitty was, and Gilbert Anoka was there as well. But they were a big part of creating that culture, you know. And I think we just sort of that was a train, and we ended up being like it was a successful formula, you know.
Yeah.
And so I think that sort of like success breeds success as well. And so I think that sort of our winning, because we won like. Became second. I mean, became middle the second year in '97, and then we won it 3 years in a row, you know. And then the rest is history, you know. But I think that was a big part of it, you know. So it's nice. Those guys, we did have some good moments, but the infrastructure was good back then, you know. And I think compared to some of the other teams, and I think a lot of it had to do with that leadership, like the older guys and obviously the coaches, you know.
Yes,
and they allowed you to be, you know, be a little bit more relaxed or be yourself, you know. They didn't really clamp down. To me, I was pretty fresh. I was from Northland, you know, so and I didn't really go too far from like my area, so I was a pretty naive guy, you know. So they were pretty good with me, really. But I didn't know how to drive. I was just like, man, rough. I was rough around the edges. I suppose I still am, but I don't know.
A lot can be said for the Crusaders and what they do. For you, is that what makes it so special? The team, those reasons you've discussed.
Yeah. I think the you know, part of it, like for me as well, is that, you know, the professional rugby, when it turned professional, the sort of the people that were in charge went from like ex-rugby players, you know, it's sort of coming back full circle now. But the guys that were the presidents and things like that, then it went more into the hands of like obviously the corporations and guys that understand money, you know. And so they started sort of making decisions sort of based off efficiency and profit, you know, which is sort of, you can understand that, you know, the sponsorships involved and all that. But then they sort of took like, without sort of putting like human well-being into it, it sort of ends up sort of transitioning into a colder machine-like product, you know, after decisions based on that from the top, you know. And so I sort of saw that transition happening sort of as while I was playing in real time, you know, and that was sort of, I didn't really appreciate that, especially when I came from rugby and what it gave me for as a kid, you know. All of a sudden it's becoming sort of a more machine-like sort of product, you know, in terms of like, there's many little things that sort of that creep in, you know. It's sort of hard to explain. That brotherhood that we sort of talk about there, that became very important because within this structure of corporate, like, because then all of a sudden all these things come out. You've got to wear this, you've got to say that, you can't do that, you can't do this, you can't say that, you can't be like this, you got to here, you got to be there, you don't want it, you know what I mean? There's all this sort of pressure. And so when you got guys that are sort of going through that same thing with you, and they can actually, and then the other thing as well is that when you talk about like sort of supporters, when supporters sort of at that stage as well, so the game's taking it from you, the corporation is taking it from you, but then the fans start trying to pull from you as well, you know what I mean? The supporters, because they got this whole version of, oh, you're up there and I'm down here, and can I get a little piece of you? You know, and so it ends up being like, you end up having to isolate yourself from that in some ways. Not every supporter, but some, you know, especially within groups, it can be like that. So they sort of just, can I have this? Can I have you? Can I have that? Can I have a picture? Can I have this? And so it's all one way, you know?
Yeah.
And so when you get that, when you have those guys that are going through that same experience with you, that's what you sort of rely on, because then it's sort of, there's a trust there. And I think within the rugby as well, the physical nature of rugby actually sort of reveals like more of like who you are, you know, in terms of like, because there's no hiding, And so if you have fear around certain things, it'll be seen on the field, you know. And so that allows you to sort of create this trust. You know, once you play rugby with somebody, you sort of know them on a more deeper level, you know, especially within a forward, because you need to you're trying to combine to become one, you know. And so you're constantly trying to edge off like your individuality. You have that, but you're trying to become a one unit, you know. And so that's the way that you're always working towards, you know. And so you're always trying to get closer. And I think with the Crusaders, we did better than that, because we did well in that department, because we were friends off the field. And so we spent a lot of time and I think part of it's geographical, because I think Christchurch, it's easy to get around, you know. So we could, within 10, 15 minutes, you could visit your mate, you know. In Auckland, it's like, man, you're on the other side of the city, and you can't really connect with each other. And like I said, I think back then as well, like the amateur, that transition from professional to amateur, we still had a lot of the amateur sort of ways that we sort of bring with us, you know. So we were drinking a lot, and we were always we always partied, we always went out. And so that was another way. It's probably not the most positive way to sort of connect with each other, but that was another bond way of we chose to bond back then, you know. It can be, obviously, there's a lot of negativity that sort of comes with that, in terms of like health reasons or having blowouts or whatever it is, you know. But back then, I suppose that was the culture, you know. I think there's other ways of doing that. There's probably other ways of more efficiently sort of doing that sort of thing. I don't know what they're doing now to cover that.
Yeah, for sure. Do you think that potentially the alcohol was been like a bit of a, you know, with all this pressure going on, it was a way of dealing with that as well, like a bit of a
definitely. But I think that, you know, it's still really prevalent within the New Zealand culture as well, you know.
100%. 100%.
So it's like, you know, it's like, well, commiserate, you drink, celebrate, you have a drink. If you're bored, have a drink, you know. And so it's sort of like, what's the alternative, you know? And I think that's probably, you know, like what we need to think about, you know. What's the alternative? What other ways can we do this that doesn't sort of compromise our consciousness, you know? You know, and what are we holding on to? Why is that? Like, you know, for me, it was like self-consciousness, or like you said, there's this pressure, there's this weight that you sort of want to release, you know, and how do you do it, you know? And back then, and I don't even know if we have it now, what sort of tools do we have to be able to do that, you know? And I think this is why, like, you know, when you've done some research on that kids project that I was sort of doing, that probably, you know, I don't know, I'm down to like 25% battery, but you know, and that was part of the inspiration for that, to be able to explore different ways of opening up to each other, and, you know, and because some of the issue is that when you've already got these ingrained patterns as you're older, of going to alcohol or going to other things for the release or opening or whatever, whatever letting things go, or however you want to do it, that pattern becomes like a barrier within itself, because you've got to sort of undo that, you know. So this is why I was thinking, man, we got to start teaching these things at schools, you know, to be able to get so we don't create the self-consciousness or these blocks that we have that we have to go to find external things to be able to like support that, you know, because that's all it is. It's an effort for self-support. And but it ends up like because all we wanted to do was just sort of enjoy ourselves and connect with each other and have a moment of just like, you know, of connection and unity, you know. And you know, but then it ends up like totally isolated. You end up like curled up in a ball, like fucking in the bathroom somewhere and spewing up, and with a whole heap of shame on your shoulders when you wake up, you know, which sort of goes into that bag of self-consciousness where it's sort of like a cycle that, you know, then you're further away from being relaxed and open, and, you know, so 100%. But that's sort of what you know, that's what are the alternative? Like I said, we didn't really have any other options, an easy option, isn't it?
Yeah, yeah, 100%. Was the like so you had Gilbert and Noka around a little bit? Did they cover any of that sort of stuff in terms of like mental skills, or was it mostly on-field sort of stuff?
Yeah, they did. Yeah, no, they did. I suppose there's a few different ways you can sort of come at it, you know. Yeah, there are some sort of skills. One part of it was sort of becoming. A lot of it was how do you sort of connect with each other, you know? How do you how do you make those connections? But one of the things what I've sort of noticed is that you need to learn how to be able to do that work within yourself first, you know, because you become the barrier. You know? So no matter how many of these like team things you're putting in, if you're in your own way, it becomes a block with everything. Some of these things can help; they can help open it up, but you need the ability to support yourself to be more conscious within yourself. That's your steps that you need to do to be able to connect with others more clearly, you know, or else you're always sort of doing it over the top of yourself, you know.
Yeah, for sure.
And so, you know, to answer your question, so a lot of the stuff was sort of they didn't really have that first step, you know, and some of it's a little bit of a skill. It's a little bit of a, you know, I like, you know, I've been interested in yoga lately, you know, doing a little bit of yoga. And so that's sort of, in its own way, it has its own sort of, it's its own sort of, it's complete in its own way for that, you know, so it covers all bases. So so there's a lot of different things that comes into that can support that individual sort of work that you need to do, you know.
Yeah, cool. Nice. So you had a couple of good stories just from some events, games. So Tabai said, even when you're a young fella, you inspired the lads through your actions, being a physical, courageous player, flying into massive yappies on the high veld. He said the boys looked around at each other and just went, fuck, let's follow this young lad. And you gain massive respect among the team.
Yeah, it's nice.
Did you, it must have been pretty, like, how old were you when you first went over to South Africa and played that sort of international? I know it's not the All Black stuff yet, but
so that's at that same stage, man. So I was like, so I was that first year professionalism. I was coming in. I would have been under 20s then, so I would have been 19, 20 when I would have gone over there. So it's that same sort of thing. I think part of that, like physicality, that was the only way that I sort of enjoyed playing the game. You know, I like to do that. That gave me a thrill. You know, that was exciting for me. And that was I like to make an impact. You know, I didn't like to play like a boring style. So I don't know. I think we had a few players like that. You know, but I was just I was a little bit crazy, I suppose. Not really thinking ahead too much. But you know, there's a few things that sort of went into that motivation. Part of it was just like, it's just I like the battle, man. I enjoyed that. You know, I like the physical side of it. I like testing myself in those situations. That's part of my MO, I suppose.
Nice.
Yeah. Speaking of the physical side of rugby, we'll sort of go to jump to the NPC final in 2001. You put a huge hit on Paul Thompson. Do you want to talk us through that?
Paul Thompson.
Paul Thompson. Yeah. Get it. So apparently Paul Thompson had a bit of a tick in his neck, and he was running back to the scrum, telling Steve Walsh there was something wrong with his neck after he'd absolutely smoked him.
No, I don't remember that.
I don't remember that. Just too many hits.
That's from Matt Sexton. You can blame him.
No, really? It was 2001. So who's he talking about? Paul Miller? No, Paul Thompson.
Paul Miller, yeah. Maybe it's Paul Miller, yeah.
Is Paul Miller the number 8?
Yeah, number 8, yeah.
Maybe. Sort of. Man,
Wow,
we're talking about like 20 years
a bit more recent. Ben Blair's talked about 2004 when you're sort of a bit later on. You went to Bay of Plenty to challenge for the Shield. He said at that stage your body was pretty wrecked. So much so you weren't really even training during the week. You just got by
Nah.
to get there on the Saturday.
Yeah.
But early in the game, you smashed, like, just completely leveled their talisman and their skipper, Wayne Ormond, and that said a full horizontal hit. And then the boys were like, right, we're on here.
Yeah, yeah, no, yeah. Unlike the other one, I remember that one. I remember it because I felt like I thought I dislocated my shoulder.
Oh, really?
But yeah, because that was that was an interesting one because that I'd taken a year, 6 months off, travel around the world, and so 2000 after 2003, I was disappointed I missed out on the World Cup, which was like painful, man. But I felt like I sort of deserved to be in that team, but that's a long story. But so I had a lot of disappointment, so I decided to put my backpack on and cruise around the world, and so that when I came back 2004, my body was never the same, because when you stop, man, you just like, everything just like seizes up, so that was one of my first games back. And I remember the guy sort of, if somebody runs straight up like that, he just got the ball and ran straight, It was just like, man, for me, that's like disrespectful. And so, so I sort of came flying in, and but I remember it just hit me. I don't know if you've ever had like, if you hit like the nerve in the shoulder, it's called like a stinger or something like that. And I just remember my shoulders, I couldn't feel it, just the whole thing just went numb, when I was lying on the ground. And then I was thinking, oh no, I popped my shoulder out, something's happened, And then I remember just lying on the ground. Then I heard the crowd like starting to like be like, good job, to me. And so I stood up, like, and I remember I had to go to the scrum, and I couldn't even put my arm around like the other guy. I had to like use my other hand to like put him around there. But as soon as I moved my arm a little bit, I was like, oh no, it's not dislocated. I remember that. But then after that, I was like, oh, I don't know if I can do that anymore. So I needed that year in 2004, I had to adapt my game again because my body wouldn't cope with it. And so every time I did something like that, it would like something drastic would happen to my body where I couldn't move, I couldn't function. So I needed to learn to be more intelligent. And so that was another evolution in my a forced evolution in my playing style, But that was the only big hit of that year. I was like, oh no, man, I can't do the same thing anymore. It's funny how these guys remember these things, eh?
Yeah.
Benny Blair was he's my favorite player, man. He's he's one of these guys that he was just like, because he reminded me of me in some ways because he was 75 kgs, and so he was always up against it, and so, but he had like the X factor, so he would like score tries where just like right at the end of the game or do something freaky, like some sort of sidestep or do something. These guys that sort of broke the game open, It's like we had the Mari Kavuni Buckers and the Normie Bees and these guys that we had the hardworking guys, but then we had the guys that were like had the ability to break the game open, and Benny Blair was one of them,
Yeah, nice. I teach his kids. They're at my school.
Okay. Oh, cool.
Yeah, he's still coaching rugby. He's a good man.
Yeah, no, he's an awesome guy.
Yeah. Before we could talk about the All Blacks, can you tell us about you played New Zealand Māori and you were Māori Player of the Year, I believe. Can you tell us a little bit about that sort of environment and how it's different to other teams and what made it so special?
Yeah. So, Māoris, like, the thing is, I was, like I said, I played rugby league, so that's predominantly Pacific Islanders that are playing that, And the area that I'm in too was more more Māoris there than anything, So most of my coaches growing up were Māoris, And so rugby and Māori culture for me were a combination. They were combined, And so this is why sort of when I went down to Canterbury and went into that sort of environment, it was like, whoa, this is a whole different environment to what I'm used to.
Yeah.
Just in terms of like I don't know. I suppose it's difficult to sort of describe it. It's more like a sensation, I suppose. you know, like with the Māoris, they're always like training hard, you know. Was training hard, do the job, do what you got to do. The trainings were probably harder in some ways, but wasn't as structured, it wasn't as like hyper organized as like the Crusaders or the All Blacks, you know. And so one sort of example for that is we used to have like a thing around like timing, you know. So at the start of the year, you do this thing, and so they're very, very strict with timing. And so, say in the professional environment, so especially even with the All Blacks or the Crusaders and the All Blacks, or I suppose with any environment, so they used to have like a fine, you know. It would be like, well, if you didn't 1 year with the All Blacks, it's like if you're late for anything, you get fined $1,000, and then you get dropped from the 15, you know. And so, and you got to remember, it's not like a 9 to 5 job. You got trainings and meetings, all different, all over the time, and that was before digital stuff. So it was like, you know, it's not like it's on your phone and reminding you or whatever, you know. And so you used to get like a thing underneath the door, and it would be like, but it would cause a lot of stress for me anyway, you know. Because man, you're just stressing out about being late for anything or being something, you know. And with the Māoris, it was just a little bit more like, you know, it's not like anybody wanted to be late or whatever, but they wouldn't they didn't have that fine system there, you know. So if a guy turned up like, no, you're not going to turn up like 5 minutes late or 10 minutes late. You're not going to do that, you know. But if you're 30 seconds or 1 minute, you know what I mean? It's not a big deal. Or they'd be a little bit more like, oh, bro, can you go get, what's his name? You know, where is he? You know, but in the other environment, it's like, oh, he's not here. Oh shit, he's done for. You know, it's just you know, that's just a subtle thing. And obviously he got the cultural side of it. But I don't know.
Did you play for them for long, or once you've made All Blacks, you weren't really able to play?
Yeah. Once you play All Blacks, you're too busy.
Yeah.
We played one game in 2000. They let the All Blacks off in 2001 when we played Australia. That was pretty good. That was a cool game.
Yeah.
The Wallabies were always we were pretty successful too.
Yeah.
We went on a tour of '98. Yeah. Went on a tour of '98. We were a pretty good team. I like it. Matt DePoe was the coach. He was a pretty awesome coach.
Yeah.
I just remember, I won't go into details, but I ended up having a blowout one night. And I just remember how he addressed it the next day, because usually if it's in the other sort of other environments, you got all these protocols you go through. You go talk to the manager. You got all this thing, man. You got to do this and that, and it's all pretty serious. But the way he did it, he was like, "Oh, I didn't hear about it." He said something, but I didn't hear about it. You know what I mean? You know, sort of like it was enough to give me the message. Well, you know, he didn't appreciate it, but he wasn't going to put me through. He wasn't going to put me through the ringer, you know. But I was already like pretty what's the name with it as well. Like, wasn't feeling good about it either. So
nice. So what year was it when you first played the All Blacks, and what was that like to change from get the Super Rugby to that next level?
Well, obviously it's a boy's dream, isn't it, to play for the All Blacks? And so it was something that I never thought I'd play for the All Blacks when I was younger, you know. It wasn't until, like I said, when I started playing for Northland and all that, when everybody else was saying it to me. Everybody else is saying, oh man, this guy's you're going to make the All Blacks, you know. But then when you don't make it, it's like, when you haven't made it yet, it's like, this sort of, what's that to you, you know? But so making it sort of like, in some ways it's obviously it's a huge honor, you know. It's something that, like, it's incredible. It's an amazing sense of achievement, especially when if you put a lot of your life into it. You know, you put a life. Once you're in there, it's all the professional rugby was all encompassing. It's something that, you know, I didn't have a lot of other time for anything else, you know. So when you sort of make that goal, I suppose it's sort of like, it's something that I don't know. It's an interesting thing. It's quite interesting because it sort of reverberates all the way through. You probably wouldn't be talking to me if I didn't make the All Blacks now, you know. I recently I just went and did like a speech at this dinner in the Caribbean, like British Virgin Islands, and it was like they wanted the next All Black there. It was like, it's crazy to think about, like, something you did like 20 something years ago. It still reverberates to this day, in some ways. But for me, like, in terms of the sensation, it was more like I was stressed. It was like, it wasn't like I felt good, but I was pressure was on, because it's like, man, I could easily like play like shit, and then I could be like, your All Blacks could be like 20 minutes, That could be your All Black career could be like 10 minutes, or not even that, I remember Kupu Benisi there were 6 of us that debuted in 1999. It was Greg Feig, Daryl Gibson, Dylan Mika, Kupu Benisi. I think it might be, maybe, was it Peter Latini, or I remember the other one, but Kupu he never played a test match, so they played one game. I think we played like a warm-up game. He played that one game. He had an awesome season, and then he never played again. And so this is sort of like this is the pressure that you sort of, just because you made the All Blacks, that's just the start of the opportunity, And so, and then when you're playing for the All Blacks, it's like, well, man, the weight of history is like incredible, because you don't want to let that jersey down, And so, yeah, it's a great honour, it's awesome, but then it's just like, man, I'll shit in myself.
So even after 36 tests, you were never comfortable in that environment as such.
The last game was a little bit different. That's a long story, man. There's a whole like storyline that we sort of need to get to that. But that was after a year of like doing a lot of soul searching, a lot of things. I ended up playing one game where I wasn't afraid, That was the last test match. But I knew that was going to be my last game, so I didn't have to impress the coach. I didn't have to impress anybody. I sort of just went out like how I wanted, And so I wasn't carrying that like repercussions with me, There's a lot of the problems of the repercussions. You're afraid of the repercussions. You're going to get dropped. You're going to get ridiculed. You're going to get, this and that. And so when you sort of take that away, you're sort of free to be like, man, this is what I got, and this is what I'm doing, and
I mean, there's that hindsight thing again, right? But do you wish you'd changed that mentality earlier?
Yeah, well, obviously it would be, to be more conscious. It's be great, to have that when you were younger. That was, what I'm talking about with the whole kids project. To be more conscious of sort of how to influence yourself. I think it's who doesn't want that? And I suppose but the thing is, it's like it's the same as where I'm at now, isn't it? So. It's a daily thing of trying to be a little bit more conscious every day, isn't it? Because we're still living, we're still playing the game in here, aren't we? So, I've sense, But in some ways, but that's the process. That's the learning process, So like, if I didn't go through all that shit and all that, like I wouldn't have got to that place, So I needed it.
Yeah. Did something happen that made you go, right, I need to do something, or what made you go take that time to sort that out that changed things?
Yeah. I think it's probably pain of ignorance, brother. It's like this is the thing, man. When you sort of like when things are getting on top of you, it's like lights a fire under you to sort of Part of it is just to be a bit more curious. I started becoming more curious on. About what else is there, Because I remember like with a moment when I was like 24, and I played 2 years for the All Blacks at that stage. I had everything. I had three houses. I had like anything that I could, like I said, I didn't have any expectations when I was younger, so I'd blown all of those out the window. And so I'd gotten everything that I'd ever dreamed from and more. But there was still something missing, I was still unhappy, It made me sort of made me think about like, is this what my life is? It's just a series of like achieving things and then feeling okay and then back on the run and back on the chase, Is that what really life's really about, And that's where I started to really think about it, you know, think, well, there's something deeper here, or is there something else? And, you know, with that curiosity, things started to sort of unravel, you know. And part of that, what you talk about, like, well, going away and all that, was just an urge that I needed to stop, you know. That this was like, this is harmful, you know, and I was harmful to myself, you know. I'm the only one that's responsible for this, you know. Really, you know, I talk about the schedule and all that, but it was my inability to communicate, it's my inability to express myself, or to support myself, that was the real villain in the situation, you know. And so I got myself into a lot of pain, physically, emotionally, and mentally, and then that was my motivation to try and get out of this pain. You know, it's not the best motivation, but this I'm a slow learner, you know. So this was I had to create like some hardships in my life to be able to like to be able to move out of them, you know, which is probably not the most intelligent strategy, but a lot of us employ that.
Oh, World Cups. So which World Cups did you go to?
I went to the 99 World Cup. That was the only one I went to.
Oh, was it?
So yeah, so we lost against the French in the semi-final.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was an interesting experience.
Yeah. That expectation, is that just grow up a level when you go to a World Cup?
Yeah. So that was one of the things. Yeah. So that was an interesting thing, because you don't know what it's like until you're there. You know, you can't really prepare. It's one of those things where you can't prepare for it until you're there. And so this is the interesting part about like the World Cups, and just because there's so many eyes. You know, there's so much.
Yeah.
If you think about it, millions of people's eyes are on you. You know, and so you got millions of people's thoughts, millions of opinions, sort of like all narrowed down to like one period of time. And it's sort of like, and in expectations, like we were going to blow these guys off the paddock, but then when expectations meet reality, they don't really match up, because expectations is like a mental construct. It's not really, it's not reality itself, you know. Yeah. So when those things aren't matching up and you're involved with it, and you're like, "Oh, hang on, what's happening here? This is not supposed to happen." And then you don't have the tools to be able to influence that. You all go into your own little patterns, you know. You go into these unconscious tendencies, and so that's what happened to us that year. You know, that within that we sort of all went into, and in a team sport, when you're going into your unconscious patterns, you end up becoming an island. You know, and so that was one of the experiences I took away from that '99 World Cup. We were all young, you know. What was I, 23, 22, 23, and a lot of us were young that year, because in '98 the ABs like lost 4 games in a row. You know, they had all the old school guys there, and so they tried to revamp. And then some of the issue was that, you know, with the cutthroat sort of New Zealand way of, at the time it was like, right, get rid of him, right, get rid of the coach, get rid of the players, you know, and then it sort of robs you of the chance to sort of come back again, you know, and sort of, and I think in 2003. That was the issue then. It was like, well, then they put a whole new group of players, and to have that one-off experience again. And I think that's probably where the All Blacks, when they failed in '97, is when they became more successful, because they didn't sack the coach. Because now you get a chance to learn from. So the World Cups, it's interesting, especially in World Cup year, you know. But so I learned a lot about in that '99, you know, especially about that. That's quite interesting, because I saw that you do something about, like, wasn't it like a course of, there was something that I saw online. What was it? Man, I would to make decisions under pressure or something like that.
Calm Under Pressure workshop. Yeah. It's Israel Adesanya's mental skills coach. Yeah, it's pretty epic.
Oh yeah. So that's interesting. It's interesting how you sort of put yourself in that situation and then be able to train it, you know.
Yeah.
To be able to like find different skills and different things to be able to like, what do you do in those moments? You know, a lot of it's about awareness, you know. But like I said back then, sort of like you don't know until you go through it, you know. And then when you're going through it, if you don't have the skills to be able to like rebalance yourself or do whatever, you're sort of a victim to it, you know.
Yeah.
And so that experience is very interesting to me. It was all part of the thing, you know. So this is why, for me, I was frustrated in 2003. I felt like I'd learned from that, and I felt like I could have made a difference, even if it wasn't on the field, just to be in the squad, because I already had that experience,
During your time with the All Blacks, you've obviously played with some incredible rugby players: Jonah Hertz, Justin Marshall, Christian Cullen. Who were, if these were the guys that had the greatest impact on you, or who were those guys that had the greatest impact on you?
Yeah. Oh man, so many awesome players, really. Yeah, Tanumanga. I played with Carter and McCaw as well in the early days, And so those guys, obviously they were sort of just younger guys. I also like Greg Somerville. He was an awesome player. Just different guys that I suppose you see different things in different people. If when you're in the job, you sort of you appreciate things in different ways. If you sort of when you understand what you're trying to achieve on a deeper level. This is why sometimes it can be. You can see the flashy stuff on the outside, but then the guys finishing the tries are doing things, but there's a lot of work that gets done before that stage, Obviously, and so some guys are doing some amazing work that probably doesn't get seen, And so, like I said, Greg Somerville was one of those guys. But yeah, like obviously Jonas is a freak, So he's an incredible athlete, something, just an amazing, what an amazing player he was.
Did you ever try and horizontal tackle him?
Yeah, I was actually, he was similar age to me. He's a couple of years older. I actually played him at school. So I played him when I was playing schoolboys. And so he was coming up through the ranks, but he was playing, I actually marked him in the line out one time because he was playing.
He was number 8,
he was playing lock number 8.
Yeah,
And, but I went to tackle, first time I went to tackle him, it was just like, this was when I was at school. People were like around his ankles, like usually when somebody's like pinned like that, like in a trap, they'll like try and come flying over the top, it's like and I tried to do it with him, and I just smashed it. He was like a steel pole, him like a steel pole. It was just like vibrations like through the body, just like. And so I was always like, and he was the only one that I was like afraid of. Like I didn't want a one-on-one with him. It was like no, because just just like physics wouldn't work. You know, he would just like snap. And with my pride, I would have to have a go, and then he would snap me in half. But I ended up getting. I gave him a couple of cheap shots. I think like with about 2, 3, 4 guys like around him, and I sort of come flying over. But I never really impacted him at all, and I didn't have enough weight. It's just a physical impossibility. But
I heard Josh Kronfeld on a podcast the other day, and he said he put the perfect tackle on him. Felt like he folded him in half and like was just smoked him, and then just saw him go into the post like unfazed.
Yeah. Well, that was one of the things. Like I remember, like when we played with Canterbury against like Wellington, sometimes he like and we got if you got a scrum like anywhere from like the 22 or whatever, on your 22, it's like wow man, Jonah's gonna score, It's like. And but then you can't get upset about it. It's sort of like you just have to let it go because it's like, well, man, what can you do? You can't do anything, Especially if you got like a Patasawala, or we had like smaller guys against him, And it's like you can't blame them. You can't be like, if I can't tackle him, you're not going to tackle him. You know what I mean? Like it's all right, man. It's just more consoling each other. Like it's all right, man. What else can we do? Just try and keep the ball away from him. Yeah. Just try and keep the ball away from him. But it's just I don't know, man. Once in a generation talent he was,
Yeah. Greg Feek asked what happens when you eat too many baguettes in France.
Oh yeah, that's right. Yeah, probably I won't go into the full story, but he's trying to set me up with a bit of a funny yarn there. I was just It's just a story where I blocked up the toilet on the plane, and so and I was freaking out. Didn't want to. I won't go into the whole thing, but I didn't want I didn't want to go out, and I ended up landing in the toilet. And it was like I was trying to save the situation, and it was just getting worse. It was snowballing on me. No, it ended up. It's funny when in
Was that
person, I suppose.
on the way back from France?
Yeah, it's the whole big story. Now that's that was when I was on a 6 month trip around the world.
Oh, cool.
Coming back, I think I was coming from Europe to South America.
Yeah, nice. So
But,
that tour, that trip you went on, did you get injured and then you went on that trip? Or
nah, I got to the stage where it was like I think I'd spent like 8 years playing professionally at that time, and I just sort of like, man, my body was all banged up, and I was just couldn't really face another season, I think we talked about it before. Sort of rugby went from 6 months to like 11 months out of the year, so we were. It was like, and as a good player, you were sort of like torn to pieces. Back then they didn't have a lot of thoughts about the consequences, I suppose, of a lot of things. So I just got to a point where it was just like, man, I wasn't enjoying it. It was getting too much. So I just decided to take a break. These days it's a little bit different. I sort of was, I suppose, being one of the first professionals, I was the first to do that. But now they have it more structured. They call it the sabbatical, don't they?
Sabbaticals, eh?
But for me, I just sort of dropped everything and just put a backpack on and just took off.
Nice.
With no guarantees. So these guys now, I think sometimes they go and play in Japan, don't they, or do something else, and everything's sort of set up for them. But back then, I sort of just left and didn't really know what I was going to do.
Was there were you at Crusaders then, and then
Yeah.
were they a bit like shocked or supportive, or how did they take that?
Yeah, I don't know. I don't remember any conversation really. At that time, it was yes. Robbie Deans was the coach, and me and him at the time were having like I don't know what you call it. I suppose we just weren't really communicating with each other at that time. So we just left without any words really. But I did play that last. I played the NPC. Was my last before I left, and that was pretty awesome season. I enjoyed that.
Yeah.
I just felt a little bit freer, I suppose, knowing that I didn't have another season and another training camp and everything afterwards.
Oh, so you'd already planned the trip there, then played NPC, and then headed off.
Yeah. I played out my contract.
Yeah, cool.
Yeah.
What was the trip like? What did you? Was it unplanned? You just took off and went, or did you kind of like plan your way around, or get on a tour, or?
Yeah, it's pretty amazing, really. No, it was sort of unplanned. I picked a spot like on the map where I was going to begin, and then sort of just saw how we go. I just sort of travelled, and it was an interesting trip. It was hard at the beginning, like I said. Especially like because the first place that I picked was Portugal. So it was like just the far end of like Portugal, right at the bottom, and I sort of got there, and when I first got dropped off there, I felt like panicked. I was like I was frozen just because I think the idea is one thing, but once you sort of do something like that, the sort of reality hits. So one of the things is everything was stripped away. I'd stripped away my my career and all my friends and everything, and I was sort of there alone, you know. So it was a very interesting sort of period, because it's sort of like over that period, like that short period where I sort of was experiencing that a lot of fear, and that I noticed that I'd used rugby as like a band-aid, you know, and so all the stuff that I was feeling, that after I'd stripped the rugby and my friends and all that lifestyle away, I was left with what was really there that I'd sort of ignored for 8 years or whatever. So I was sort of connecting with this younger part of me that was still, I suppose it had been sort of waiting there underneath of all this other stuff. So it was an interesting experience. So that 6 months was sort of an unraveling of sort of getting to know that younger part of me that I'd sort of tried to cover up with my rugby sort of career and endeavours and money and friends and all the rest of it, you know. So it was quite, you know, I dedicated myself to sort of not to go back down the same patterns of drinking or doing those things. I wanted to be like very to have a lot of solitude, you know. So I spent the time like sitting in different places. I'd go sit in natural places, or I'd go sit in a church, and so the whole time I was like just really trying to slow down from just having a really fast-paced life. And so I just really wanted to like dig deep and go deeper into what I was carrying with me, you know, because one of the things was very clear to me is that you could travel to the far side of the world, but you're still carrying everything inside of you, you know. So no matter what you see, even though your external surroundings has changed, your internal environment is the same, you know. And so it's always coloured. It was always coloured by that. So part of my intention was just instinctively just wanted to slow down and just to recoup, I suppose, and regather, you know. So it was a very interesting period of my life for sure. Yeah.
So you just worked that out, like, as you didn't have any sort of research on what was how to cope with that. You just kind of worked it out as you went.
I think a big part of it. Well, I think it's sort of it's just a natural process. I think, you know, I don't think you need to like overcomplicate it. And part of it was just creating space, and then having the ability to sort of pay attention. So back then it was before smartphones and things like that. That was 2004 when I did that. And so I didn't have a lot of distractions in my pocket. You know, I had my cell phone. I could send text messages for 20 cents or 50 cents a text. You know, and there was not a lot of like. I wasn't really connected onto the internet then, so I didn't. You weren't looking ahead for to look for places to stay and things like that, you know. I just had to do it on the run, you know, and just work things out at the time, you know. So there wasn't this sort of like barrier, and so some of it was intense because I ended up going through Egypt and things like that, and Egypt was tough because it's intense, you know. And so but like I said, that with the I'd sort of, I don't know. I think the intention was for me just to find out what I was carrying, you know. And so with that intention, everything sort of unfolded from that. So I had that clarity, and that sort of just, like I said, that sort of happened naturally just for a series sort of events, you know. After I'd finished playing with the Canterbury team, I started like, when I pretty much went on a bender, you know.
Yeah.
So that bender was like, I sort of saw that as freedom, you know. It was like, oh, okay, well, I'm not going to be playing now so I can do what I want now, you know. I haven't got Big Brother over my shoulder telling me what to do all the time, telling me what to wear. Now it's me, you know. And so then, and that time of year, there's always lots of stag do's, there's lots of things going on, and so we pretty much was partying all the time, you know. And so I think I probably did about maybe 9 weeks straight, you know. And then I got to a point where it was just like, oh man, I was just like, I had a moment of clarity where it was like, you have to stop, you know, and it wasn't working anymore. So that I sort of started to understand, well, that's not really freedom, just doing sort of what you want to do. It's sort of like freedom's doing what you need to do, like happily, you know. And so that sort of sparked the intention for the rest of the trip, you know. Just pushed myself to that limit where I just was like, man, I need to stop. This is not really working, you know. I was searching for the good time, but it was actually creating like more pain and more dysfunction, like within my body, you know. And so that was one of the big things for me, especially on that trip, is like when you stop everything, it all catches up with you, you know. And so it's sort of like I had a backlog of information that I'd been holding on to, storing onto, not just the, like I said, the younger stuff, but also like all the pain and all the stuff that I'd been ignoring. When you stop, it comes at you, you know. And so I just made the commitment that I wasn't going to run from it. And so that pain has its own way, or whatever it is, has its own way of unfolding naturally. And so that was, like I said, it starts off with just, and if you can have the ability to maintain a bit of space, but also like pay attention to it, it sort of unravels itself. And so a lot of the thing with me, it was, especially if you can learn to respond to it, you know. And so that was the thing with my body and all that. It was just so painful, man. I was like, pain was just so tight, everything was just like stiffened up, so I could hardly sleep, you know. I couldn't sit for too long, I couldn't stand for too long, I couldn't lie down for too long, because it's like, I remember I thought about it, it's like I was like a rotisserie chicken when I was sleeping. It was like, but instead of fire, it was like pain, you know, like like every 5 minutes I'm waking up because the dislocations on my shoulders or my back, or the discs in my back, or whatever, is like getting to a stage where it's like getting too much pain, you know. So yeah, you can cover it up with anti-inflammatories, with pain medication, with alcohol, with sort of distractions. But when you strip all of that away, you're left with what you haven't dealt with, you know. Then you have a choice. Well, I can keep going down that path of like, what's the word for it, like of coping with them, short-term coping, or you can sort of stop and think, well, now I need to deal with this, you know. And so and especially with the physical body, there's a process to it. You can't just think, oh, okay, I'm going to look after it now. I'm going to be good to it. Now it's going to be good to me. It's going to say, well, no, well, you've spent 8 years like ignoring me. Now you need, it's not going to be so easy, you know. And so that's sort of what I felt, what I found out as well, you know.
Did you intentionally pick sort of slow paced places and like bit out of the big cities, and did you connect with anyone in particular, or did you pretty much do the whole thing like sort of solo?
95% on my own, you know. I did like go and visit some of the boys, like in England and in France, just like for a few days. Just as my way around, I just thought, oh, you know, like these guys are playing there. I wanted to go and visit them, you know. But other than that, no, I was alone. But no, I sort of was a mixture of things that, you know. Like I said, I wanted to go to Egypt, and Egypt's not like an out of the way. It's not like a slow place for sure. You know, they're coming at you like all guns blazing. But then I was sort of like, you know, then I went and just was on an island for like 3 weeks and on my own, pretty much on my own. And then I thought, oh, well, I'm going to go and do something. Then I went to Nepal for a while, but I wanted to go to India. But then I was like, man, I needed to get like a visa and all that. I didn't have, you know, because the way I thought, well, I'm going to put myself back into the fire for a little bit and then pull myself out, you know. So it was just a mixture of things, and I sort of ended up in South America, and that's where I really sort of stopped, you know. And I spent like 2 months pretty much just in one place, you know. I had a plan to go to Machu Picchu and had tickets and ahead of time to sort of fly to Lima, and because I was in Brazil. But then I just thought, oh man, I really want to get to the bottom of all this, and I'm just going to stay here. And I spent like sometimes like 8 hours a day, like in meditation, you know, with my eyes closed, and And of course, I thought, well, one of the things that I discovered early on is that how much I'd been looking externally for a reflection of myself. This was the big quest to be the rugby player and all that, and so I found out like that I'd been looking in the wrong place, because that it's actually like your perception of yourself is the key thing. What's going on inside of you is the key thing. It's the common denominator, and so and so that's and so
meditation stuff like just by yourself, or do you?
Yeah, just by myself. But it was like, well, what's the opposite of like looking for yourself externally? What's closing your eyes and sitting with yourself, isn't it? So I thought, well, and I'm in a bit of an extreme character, so I ended up like just going hard with that. Looking back, it probably wasn't ideal. In some ways, it was cool. It was a tough process because, man, my head's spinning. But my back, that was the worst part. It's just my back. So I sort of like I was toughing out the pain, like trying to sit. And it didn't help me. It didn't help me when I returned because my back wasn't good.
Yeah. Do you still meditate and stuff now?
Yeah, I've got different sort of forms of it. Like that was sort of like winging it, really. I was just, it wasn't, I suppose, I don't know if you can really call it meditate or whatever, but I was just sitting, with my eyes closed. I didn't really have any, different, I know there's different sort of forms of meditation and things like that, but I don't really prescribe to anything in particular, but I'm sort of at the moment I do a little bit, but it's more like I'm just trying to empty myself, So a lot of the time I'm not trying to occupy my mind. I'm just trying to like just relax and just create some space,
Oh yeah. I mean, I've dabbled with it a bit. I find it quite hard because it's just like life's so full on, and it's just like go, hustle, and we're on our phones, and it's like your brain's just not used to sitting still, So
that's right. That's right. It's the brain tends to like get busy and spin, doesn't it? But one thing that I've learned with that too is that you need to be careful with what you're doing with these things. Some of these tools are pretty powerful, and so I don't think it's something to dabble around with. You need to sort of, I think if you're going to learn some practice or you're going to learn something like that, you need to be able to do it from like a reliable, trustworthy source, And so I've been to India a few times and learned some like traditional practices that are, that have integrity, and I think that's important if somebody's thinking about like going into picking up some tools or doing some things. You need to be careful about what you're doing because you can sort of make things worse if you're not careful.
Yeah. So when you're in India, did you go to the was it like Buddhist sort of stuff, or was it
No. Well, there's like I've just been to like a few different. There's a few centers that teach some sort of yogic practices, and so sort of yoga, like Hinduism is sort of involved, is involved with sort of yogic practices, but but like I said, I'm not too. I respect all the religions and everything like that, but for me personally, I try to like do my own thing a little bit,
Yeah, cool. So, what was the highlight of that trip? What was any particular?
Yeah. So, well, it's interesting. Yeah, I think it's just it was a combination of factors, sort of, because what happened was I ended up going back to play, and so that was sort of I decided to go back and I was going to play again. And so then my mission was like to get myself right, to go back and play again, and there was a whole thing with the body and all that. And so some of the highlights, like obviously at the beginning was sort of just understanding how much sort of externally focused that I was. I think was a very important message for me, you know, that I needed to learn to sort of like turn inward. And I think that was that was an amazing message that sort of has served me over the years, you know. And then also just, I think towards the end of that trip, I sort of got to a place where it was like, well, rugby was like, I didn't really need rugby anymore, you know. It was just, I'd sort of blown it up to, as in being like super important, you know, and it was just an aspect of my life, you know. I thought it was, since a young age, I sort of attached to rugby. And so from there, I sort of was like, I knew that it wasn't really me. That was just part of my life, you know. It was a part of my experience. It wasn't actually me, you know. And so I learned that it was more important, like how I was, you know, and what I share, not like what I had done and you know, and who I was. And so that was a very important thing for me as well, because when I went to go back to play, it took a lot of pressure off me, because my self-worth wasn't attached to being a good rugby player, you know. And that was an important thing for me, especially because I retired like maybe a year and a half later from that, or 2 years from there. And if I didn't have that sort of understanding at that time, my retirement would have been a whole lot worse, because I would have had to deal with that now. So I dealt with it a couple of years before I actually let it go, you know. And so it wasn't that burning pressure to sort of prove myself and to become somebody and be good and be at the top. It sort of left me, you know. I sort of discovered that it wasn't, you know, that was something that I just was creating, you know. And I think that part of that is that I wasn't really acknowledging, like, I was looking for other people to fill me up, you know. And so once I sort of understood that I actually am the only one with that power, that sort of created another journey to learn how to do that, you know. And I'm not saying that, you know, that I'm good at that, but at least I sort of know that direction, that I know that other people aren't, and things that I'm doing are not going to fill me, you know.
Yeah. How did that affect your rugby when you got back?
Yeah, good question. It was quite amazing, really. In some ways, the big issue for me is that my body was beyond its best, you know. And so, like I said before, and being unwilling to go back onto the anti-inflammatories and painkillers and injections and cortisones and things like that, it left me with what was there, you know. And so I needed to adapt my game in a whole different way, because my body just could not cope with my old way of being, you know. So my body was what body was trying to teach me, as it tries to teach all of us, you know. But I had no choice. I had no real choice to listen, because it was stiffening up, you know. Because one of the things early on is that I tore the muscle out of my leg, and I continued to run and out of balance, and everything was tearing, and like I had a massive amount of scar tissue in my legs, where the blood flow is not really normal. The tissue is different, you know. And so my body couldn't recover. It couldn't recover from stiffness, or couldn't. And so I would just, even if I go for a run over, overextending myself, like. I learned that I had to run like 75%. If I ran over that, my body would lock up, you know. And so especially even with my back would lock up. And so I needed to learn to be more conscious. So I had to learn to be a lot more intelligent when I came back to play. Where before I was just like using my body as a battering ram, throwing myself around. And so I had to change my whole style, because that was one of the things is that I was renowned for being like a hard man, or renowned for the big tackles, or renowned for these things. And I had to try, and by learning to be more intelligent and trying to get there earlier, to avoid the big impact, or read the play a little bit more, and be a little more technical, instead of like letting my emotion drive me. I was actually pulling down this old image that I'd created of myself, you know, and that was a painful process, because I'd spent so long creating this image, and now I felt like I was tearing it to pieces. But at the same time, I was being like integral to me, because before I would give away my well-being, like in terms of like, for an example, smashing my body up or whatever, like I didn't care about it for some emotional or psychological comfort from others, But at the end of the day, I was hurting myself. And so this way I wasn't hurting myself, but then I was like, I didn't get the acknowledgement that I got before. So it was it was a very challenging thing. So that was one of the things I had to learn to, can I give by giving everything that I can, because that's the first thing, trying my best with everything that I can I let go of it? Can I let go of the rest, and can I be happy with myself for just giving 100%, even if I'm not performing exactly how ideally I would like, and so can I have the strength to pat myself on the back when everybody else is not, if you're not really conscious, you go into these subconscious patterns, of just coping mechanisms. And quite often they go in two different ways, you either sort of withdraw or you fight, or you try too hard. And so that's what I sort of noticed, and this is why it's that experience, I suppose, even though it was a tough one, it was an important frame of reference, to be able to understand like what my particular pattern was in that moment, what my teammates what was happening with my teammates in that moment, and I remember at one stage in that game, I looked around and everybody was just like vacant. You looked into their eyes and they were vacant. They had gone missing, that. And so as a team sport, when you turn into an island, you lose the ability to adapt and respond to the moment, and work together. You may like in some ways it was beneficial for me, because I used to get angry and just go harder, and I think and in some ways that could be okay, but then I wouldn't talk to anybody. And so with this new sort of vision, I could see what was happening with other guys. I could see their patterns that they would go into at certain stages. And so I'd get everybody in a circle, and I'd try to look at everybody in the eye and like tap them and say, hey man, if I see that they're, because for an example, like they'll either get stuck in the past or get like freaking out about the future, And so it's like, man, you can say, come on man, come back, give them a little tap, don't worry about it, man, what are we going to do now? Because rugby is important. It's like anything, you get a chance to restart, And so one of the things especially when I look at the All Blacks, or I look at the World Cup, I'll watch the spaces in between play, and so because the game it's always on, there's no separation, and so I can tell what's happening within the team even more within those spaces. So if you look at the team within the space between play, you can see where they're at, how they're working. Are they talking with each other? Are they supporting each other? How's their body language? And then you can sort of see where they're tracking. Are they swamped? Have they turned into individuals? Because it's easy when you're up by 2 or 3 points to be tapping each other and come on and be all that. But when you're down by 2 tries, what are you doing there? How are you responding there? Because those tries are like, that's gonna. If you don't have that ability to sort of be fully on and fully connected with each other, it's going to impact your next movement or your next job, that you do, because you're individual. And so one of the things that I saw, like I could see it like in the England game in the semi-final and the last one, I could tell straight away. I'm like, oh, we're in trouble. I could sort of see the boys like straight away. And I think part of me, I know it would have been difficult, but I could see it straight away at the haka when they did that big V, and we sort of just didn't really respond to it. I'd love for us to broke out a formation or done something, done something spontaneous to think, well, you're going to do this, I'm going to do this, And then we sort of got stuck in that pattern. And then, like I said, if you look in between if you look in the spaces in between play, you can pick up a lot of information. And so I was learning that. I was learning that along in that season, within my own sort of journey with it. And that was good, but that's another invisible. It was like nobody really saw that was happening, And I suppose I didn't really have I didn't have the ability to sort of like pat myself on the back for that, because I was still beating myself up in some other ways, But it's a valuable experience, even though it was hard. It was a valuable experience, because as I went, after I retired, I sort of had a lot more as a coach to draw from, a lot more information to draw from, because as a player I sort of went through it,
If in hindsight's a great thing, but if you had, or if someone can relate to this, moment now, like if they're going through some of the stuff you did when you were younger, what advice would you give yourself when you're maybe a bit early, to somehow have that sort of realization of looking in earlier? What would you tell someone?
That's a tough one. It's a tough one, because it happens as it happens, isn't it? And it's all part of itself. Like if I didn't have those blowouts, or I didn't push myself to the limit, I would never have really. For me, I would never have got there.
Yeah.
I think it's a good question, but I think it's impossible to answer, really. Other than like invest in like Amazon or something like that, I think that I think it's more sort of tool based, and that sort of leads on to like the work after rugby, in terms of this kids project and all that. And so I went into coaching, right? So and so as a coach, I wanted to try to support my players to have similar experiences that I had, in terms of using rugby, using the vehicle at rugby as a vehicle, sort of to learn about themselves and have the ability to be able to like improve their life, to wake up to their life, because rugby is like exercise. It's like a experience-based learning program in a lot of ways, because you're always trying to get better. Whatever sport it is, you're always trying to improve. You're always trying to like wake up. You're always trying to like look for the edge, And so you use that commitment and it's just a different type of focus. If you have like a different focus, you can, and an intention, you can sort of do some amazing things. Even not just like playing an awesome game. You can create some amazing things for yourself, to become a better person, a better man, a better son, father, whatever, and that's the ultimate, isn't it? And so this is what we're all trying to do, is we're trying to evolve, aren't we, as people? And so to answer your question, I think it's just tools, like I didn't have any tools. I sort of had to learn the hard way, and so part of my sort of quest after that is that how can I support these players to have some tools, give them some tools, and then they get a choice whether they use them or not, give them a focus, give them some consciousness around what's important, other than playing an awesome game, playing together and all the rest of it. And that was my inspiration for the Kids Project, is to support children early on to learn some of these tools, to have some of these experiences while they're younger, so they didn't have to learn it like me, like pushing myself right to the edge of like dysfunction or whatever, disaster, before I actually had to wake up to, oh man, I need to change my life, And so, I sort of chose to learn it the hard way. And like I said, I had to learn it that hard way. And then so I would, I would love to, instead of this, with the school system, instead of just like learning and regurgitating information, give them some life experiences, and give them some tools and some support in terms of like how to deal with what's going on inside, and so not instead of always being like, oh, when you what am I going to do when I grow up and what I'm going to do. It's always about the preparation. It's about, well, how I am now, or how can I influence my life now, and how do I want to be now, and then from that place, your life unfolds in a different way, because a lot of these kids aren't even getting there. You know what I mean? And so it's like, what's the point? I'm just always like doing it, and then you're just throwing out there as well. And like in terms of like, and one's another thing's like negotiation, right? So communication or negotiation. Now, I had no idea of this whole concept, and it all depends on your obviously your parenting background and all that, like, okay, if you've got like entrepreneurial parents and things like that, you're going to learn instinctively about this whole situation. But if you've got parents that sort of have worked hard all their life and, haven't really, that have lived like a life sort of like, just like I said, of working hard and things like that, you don't really get to understand the whole negotiation thing and all the rest of it. So I got ripped off so many times, man, in my life, for whether it be buying a house or whether it be contract negotiations, or just being able to like talk, like, and so part I wanted to do with the kids is that like get them to do some of these things, learn how to negotiate now, learn how to like communicate now, and then you're going to take that through in your life in a whole different way, instead of some of the other things they learn that they're never going to, all it is just like preoccupying their mind. And it's something that could be beneficial for their whole life,
Yeah. So you, when you finished up footy, did you? Where was it you went first? So you're in Spain now, but did you go Kenya and India?
No. So I finished up and I've had one season in Japan, and I sort of I travelled South America for maybe a year and a half, maybe.
Yeah.
And then came back to New Zealand for a little while, and then after that I went to Spain. Coached a couple of years. That was in 2010, so about 5 years sort of away from rugby. And then I went back to rugby 2010. I found it quite interesting. I didn't want to go back into the professional stuff because I wasn't happy with the direction it was going. It was just getting too cold machine-like for me. I was losing some of the warmth of what I loved about the game. So I wanted to go to semi-professional. That's why I came to Spain. And I was only ever going to be here for like a year or two, something interesting. And then I ended up like with a Spanish partner, and 13 years later, I'm still here, But I coached for a couple of years, and then I really wanted to do. One of the things is that when I was traveling, especially on that 6-month trip around the world, when you're traveling within rugby, your mind is like preoccupied,
Yeah.
So and the countries.
Whole 30 people looking after you.
Yeah, that's right. And so it's a whole different experience, And so, yes, when I remember when I was younger, I first went to South Africa, probably when I was 19 or 20, and I was taken back by how a lot of the poverty, a lot of people sort of lived, and that sort of really hit me hard. It's one thing sort of, and then when I was on that trip around the world, I was more open, and obviously I was going to Nepal, and I seen a lot of children and a lot of people living in some, you've been to India a few times as well. You've seen people living in some
it's crazy,
challenging ways, and it's sort of like you think about our life, and you think about sort of their lives, and you think, wow, there's a massive divide here, A lot of people they didn't have a lot of choice in some of these things, and it's challenging to see, and so that was sort of happened to me where it was sort of like really hit me hard, especially in places like all the children on the street in Nepal, and I was sort of traveling through that, Kathmandu, these kids that are just cast out to sort of live on their own, and that sort of always stayed with me, and that was something that, rugby was, I don't know, I love rugby, and I love the technique, and I love the game, and I'm a purist, and I love the battle, and this is something that it's always going to be with me. But then another part of me is like, well, there's a bigger picture here, and some of it's sort of like, man, am I actually treading water here? Is this, is this sort of like technique stuff is good, like I like it, but it's like, especially like with some of the Spanish, they like hitting your head against the wall in some ways, because it's like, one of the things that I found like challenging when I came to Spain was that when you're with the All Blacks or with the Crusaders or with any sort of, even, I don't know if it's a cultural thing or whatever, people are like going hard, they're giving it everything you've got, and then it was the first time I sort of came to a place where some guys would be like giving it like maybe half of what they got or less, in terms of like training or not turning up to training or not doing the stuff that, not like, I always wanted to try and be like cutting it, like try and be my best that I could be, so I was always like looking for things. I had these coping mechanisms, and I probably didn't do the things that I could have. I wasn't really aware of it at the time, but I would change my diet, or if I wasn't happy with things, I would train a little bit differently. I was always looking for change, and when I came here, it was like, some guys are just happy to be like, I suppose, mediocre, just for the sake of a different word. And this is my perception. And so it was a challenging thing for me, especially when you're teaching the basics. It's like just teaching them over and over again. It was a little bit mind-numbing for me, And I think that's probably the reason why a lot of people don't really come to some of these areas where it's not so serious, or whatever. People aren't taking it so serious. It's not to say that, that you can't make some amazing ingrains, and I did, but the progress was a little bit slow in some ways, for me. And I suppose that's my shortcomings. It's not them, but I just find it challenging. So in the back of my head, there was always, there's something bigger than I can do here, something more that I could give maybe. And this is why the idea for the kids project sort of came up, because I'm like, well, how can I use what I've learned to be able to support these needy children around the world and bring them together and to support each other, support themselves, and be like a bridge, because I knew that I'm no savior, I'm nothing like that, but I can support like bringing people together and creating some structure, And so this is what the idea of creating the kids project was up, And so the original idea of the kids project was to match up children from around the world, because now, especially with technology, it's just a thin veil now. Well, look at me and you, we could be sitting in the same room, where in the past it was like, it's the stories, or maybe old videos or whatever, and so, the whole adage of like, people are hungry in Africa or whatever, it's like, well, it's disconnected if you don't actually see it or be with it, and when you're in that environment, then it's a whole different experience, And so now more than ever, we can be more connected, So the idea was using technology as like a bridge and supporting these children. Put children in New Zealand and needy groups of children around the world to support an exchange between them, And so it's like matching the needs together, And it's all it is supporting them to send sort of goodwill and support, and also like some material stuff if they're so way inclined, But that's secondary to be able to see each other, to be able to empathize with each other, to be able to understand what each other's lives are, alike. Because, and it's not like the countries in the First World or whatever are superior to the ones in the Third World, because they both have things to give each other, because like people, even though you might have the physical, there's all types of definition of poverty. It's not just material poverty, there's emotional, there's a poverty of love, there's poverty of acknowledgement, there's poverty of all sorts of of empathy, you know, and so these resilient kids that are over in these other areas, they have a lot to teach. See children in New Zealand and vice versa. So it's just matching the needs up within a supportive sort of structure. So that was the first idea. And then so I put some time into it, probably about a year maybe, creating a structure. And the idea was going to go through the school systems, it was just going to be a small project where you sort of, it's about like matching stories together. So my story, your story, our story, and so, and combine it together and being able to sort of work on a story together, how can we sort of influence each other's lives? And a big part of it is to learn to be a global citizen. So understanding the big picture of how we're all living and how we can support each other with that, and what happened, I went to New Zealand and I was going to get it off the ground, but then my partner got pregnant and we wanted to come back to Spain to be close to her family, and so we put that project on the back burner and went back to coaching again. So and while I was raising my son, and so then after about 5 years of that, another 6 years coaching, 5 or 6 years coaching, that was always in the back of my head, the kids project, and so then I wanted to start it up again with my partner as well, because she's that way inclined. She's always been very interested in child education and things like that, and so part of it for me was, oh man, I wish I'd learned these things when I was younger. I wish I would, that was a big part of my motivation, if only I had these sort of tools, and so, and then the other thing as well is that sometimes it's accidental with these kids. Like some of the kids go to some good schools, they can be exposed to some positive experiences, you know what I mean? And a lot of it's got to do with resources as well. And so some of these, there's a lot of pressure in some of these private schools for performance and all that, but then also sometimes they have the resources to be able to go different places or do different things and support the kids in a different way, or these alternative schools. So I wanted to create a project that went to different schools. So I actually go to them, even if the school might not be that supportive for some of these children's needs, you go there, you know what I mean? And so
awesome, man. Thank you so much, Maxie, and hope to stay in touch and let me know how these things get on, because I'm really interested to see how they get on. Yeah. Nah, you'll get there. You'll get there. Awesome. Bro. Cheers, mate. Thanks, mate. Thanks for listening to the Evolve Your Game podcast. Hope you've taken some insight and enjoyed what we had to offer today. Make sure you like and subscribe and share on your socials. Tag us. We would like to see who's listening. And we'll catch you back next week on the Evolve Your Game podcast.